welcome to episode 676 of the podcast, devoted to the classic and sometimes not-so-classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Monster Kid Radio, and I'm your writer, host, producer, Derek M. Koch. Welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. Happy to have you here, well, every week, really, but thank you for coming this week. I've got what I think will be a fun episode lined up because I had a chance to sit in on a panel at the recent Rose City Comic-Con at the beginning of this month here in the Portland, Oregon area. The panel was called The Classic Modern Monsters from TV and Film. The panel was moderated by Jessica Dwyer from Joe Blow. You can find that over at joeblow.com. She's a writer over there. She also does quite a bit of stuff in the fan space when it comes to horror movies, and well, she put this panel together and asked if I wanted to be part of it, and I jumped at it before I realized that Joe Lansdale was also on the panel. How cool is that? And David Heath from The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos and Monster Kid Radio Irregular also came in to be part of the panel. It was a fun chat, and I got permission to record it and use it on Monster Kid Radio, so that's what you're going to get this week. Plus, Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review. He's still going through Ultraman and having a good time doing it. The Beta Capsule reviews are structured to do an episode-by-episode guide through the Ultraman franchise, and we are into episode 15 of Ultraman Ace. Plus, we have Kitty's look at famous monsters of Filmland, so that's coming up here in a few minutes as well. And then stick around at the end of the episode. I've got another one of those special announcements that I tend to be making a lot of lately, but this one's pretty important. So please stick around once we get to the end of the episode. But to get to the end of the episode, we've got to get through the rest of the episode. So why don't we go ahead and do that now?
It could be true, you know. There could actually be a man named Barnabas Collins, and he could actually be a real vampire. House of Dark Shadows from MGM. See how the vampires do it.
Rated GP, all ages, parental guidance.
Coming this fall, Halloween spook show at the House of Frankenstein.
Not for the faint of heart. 4 giant horror episodes. Monsters run live through your earbuds. Terrifying, mystifying.
Here, in person, the monster and his bride argue.
The headless ghost cackle. The Cajun zombie murder the king's English.
Plus, these cinematic creeps will chill you to the bone. Man and Monster, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde.
As men of science, we should be curious and bold enough to peer beyond it into the many wonders it conceals.
The evil genius of Baron Frankenstein.
Why had the world condemned me? Because I was the first man to create another living being.
Barnabas Collins, vampire.
Do you think anyone could enjoy an existence like mine? I haven't seen the light of day in almost 200 years.
The undead but lovely Corpse Bride.
You may kiss the bride.
Witness your favorite heroes battle ghastly ghouls. Wonder Woman and Wonder Girl, The Phantom Stranger, Captain Marvel, Superman, and Lois Lane.
If you have a weak stomach, don't visit the Supermates podcast at fireandwaterpodcast.com. But if you can stand the blood-curdling terror, direct your podcatcher to the House of Frankenstein Spook Show.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 15, Summer Horror Series, Curse of the Black Crab. A strange monster attacks a fishing vessel in the same location where a young boy awaits the return of his father, a missing fisherman. Moments before the attack, the boy picks up a horseshoe crab that was thrown from the boat and takes it away. He's accused of thievery, but it comes to light that the horseshoe crab is a protected species and shouldn't have been on board in the first place. TAC member Kono happens to be on vacation at the seaside and meets the boy, Yumaji, and prevents him from getting into further trouble. Kono's niece, Yumiko, befriends Yumeji, who's forewarned of a monster attack, and sure enough, a giant fire-breathing crab comes ashore to wreak havoc. Kono and Yumiko are reunited, and Hokuto, who is on air patrol, confronts the crab monster and is promptly forced into an emergency landing. The rest of TAC arrives to give support and bombards the creature, but it disappears into a different dimension, controlled by the Yapool. The only lead they have in locating the crab monster is through the unconventional means provided by young Yumeji, if TAC can be convinced it's worth their while to trust in a boy who receives messages from a horseshoe crab. Episode 15, which was broadcast on July 14, 1972, is billed as part 1 of the summer horror series, the summertime being the traditional spooky season in Japan due to long, uncomfortably humid nights. There are definitely elements of horror to the story, especially the opening sequence in which red eyes are glimpsed just underwater, and a supernatural element to the character of Yumeji that goes unexplained. Rounding out Curse of the Black Crab is plenty of attractive location photography, pyrotechnics galore, and a prolonged monster battle complete with a whimsical nod to sumo wrestling. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Blacula is back. All new. All powerful. Blacula, the Black Prince of Shadows, rises from his grave to stalk the earth again in the all-new motion picture chiller, Scream, Blacula, Scream. Blacula returns, quenching his thirst for blood in a death trap for his enemies. Blacula, more horrifying than Dracula, screaming for revenge against a voodoo cult of evil. See Scream, Blacula, Scream, all new, rated PG, starring William Marshall, Don Mitchell, and Pam Grier, the sensuous godmother of coffee. You were terrified at Blacula. Now the Prince of Shadows returns in Scream, Blacula, Scream.
Today's young people find it fascinating to dabble in the supernatural.
How would you feel about driving a wooden stake through somebody's heart? Because I think you and I are going to have to kill Count Yorga. It's conceivable that Paul and Erica might have turned into vampires. That's true, we'll have to kill them too.
Count Yorga Vampire is a horror-haunting tale of today that could happen to you. Count Yorga Vampire is not of the past, it is now. See Count Yorga Vampire, rated GP, parental guidance suggested.
Hello there, Monster Kid Radio heads. This is Kenny with a look at famous monsters of Filmland. Today we are hearing a panel from the Rose City Comic Con, where our host Derek Cook participated in a talk about 70s monster movies. For this segment, I want to continue my look at the Fantasy Film Con from 1973 from FM 107. The next section is about the program for the weekend. Here's an introduction to the program guide. The FilmCon committee published a 21-page souvenir called "It Was a Giant Teenage Alien Insect Creature That Came from Outer Space" to become the FilmCon 2 film guide. The introduction to which, in part, reads, "When looking over the film list and schedule for this convention, probably two questions come to the mind of the reader and convention attendee. Why choose the 1950s as a theme? And, okay, if you must, the 1950s, but why these films? These are legitimate questions, and there are answers. First, the 1950s are popular right now as part of the nostalgia craze, and we thought that convention members might get a kick out of what entertained so many people 20 years ago. Secondly, many of the science fiction TV shows of today, most of the horror movies, and many of the most popular performers in both get their starts in the 1950s. Why aren't we showing the big classics? Where are The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, War of the Worlds, etc.? Frankly, we felt that these films are overexposed, run time and time again by film clubs, at conventions, on television. These are living films, and as such, most people have a wide opportunity to see them. We chose the lesser films of the 50s, the Colossus of New York sort of picture, largely unappreciated, very definitely minor, but still nice little movies. Things that have enough quality to them that they should not be allowed to languish unseen at 3 a.m. So we have put together what we consider to be a representative sampling of all the types of fantastic films from the 50s. Next, there were a series of write-ups on a number of the films that were going to be featured during the convention. Most were bona fide classics we all know and love, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Rodan, and Tarantula. But there were also lesser-known modern films in the schedule. In keeping with today's theme, I want to share 3 70s films I know little about and have not seen that were shown during the con. Questor. The story is about an android, Questor, who is created in a lab following the incomplete tapes left by a missing scientist. Many of the people working on the project do not even know what all the information that is being fed into Questor may contain or mean to him. When the android is activated, he completes the job of making himself look human and leaves the lab by force. He finds one of the men involved in the project, Jerry Robinson, and forces him to help the android follow a built-in compulsion to find the missing scientists. Through a series of adventures, they also grow in friendship, and the ending is a launching into a series format. Jonathan. A German Dracula. Jonathan goes on a mission to reconnoiter the castle of the vampire leader who has been oppressing the country. His mission is doomed to failure because a henchman overhears the plan. He reaches the castle but is captured there. Fortunately, his countrymen have discovered the henchman's spying. They come to the rescue in force to battle the vampire's army and drive the vampires into the sea. The vampire is the counterpart of Hitler. His jack-booted bully boys are the SS or SA. His satin-robed vampire congregation are the Nazi elite. The robes are the colors of the swastika flag. The vampire leader's similarity to Hitler is not overdrawn, but he does have the black comma of hair and does rant at his men with the same voice. The film's cinematography is magnificent. The music is also impressive for the most part. The characters are not really developed at all. The dialogue is minimal. The violence is gratuitous and sometimes cruel in reality. A henchman stomps a real live rat. Overall, the atmosphere is excellent. While there are no shocks as such, there is a constant feeling of impending doom that is most evident in one scene where a beleaguered village barricades itself indoors to prepare for a vampire attack. A hatchet for the honeymoon. Now that Roger Corman is in semi-retirement as a director, he plans to begin directing again in about a year. The foremost visual stylist working in fantastic films today is the crazy Italian genius Mario Bava. Bava began as a cameraman, and this is apparent in his work as a director. Despite a tendency to overuse the zoom lens, all of Bava's films are so rich visually that they are almost fattening. The story in this one seems at first to be a bizarre variation on the psycho killer story, dealing with a man with a bridal obsession. He murders other men's brides with a cleaver. But when he begins to be haunted by the ghost of his own murdered wife, the story takes a quite unexpected turn and provides a real variant on haunting, which must be seen to be appreciated. That is all for this week's look at Famous Monsters of Filmland. We will have more next time. For MKR, this is Kenny saying adios.
Flesh crawls. Blood curdles. The coffin hasn't been built that can hold him. Dr. Fives rises again.
Fives! Wait!
Dr. Fives rises again in an even more startling motion picture with a whole new gallery of gruesome gimmicks of torture and murder. See the scorpion's embrace. The eagle's caress.
No!
the sausage machine. See Dr. Fives outduel his enemies with the most diabolical devices ever created. See Dr. Fives Rises Again, starring Vincent Price as the menacing Fives and Robert Quarry as the evil Biderbeck. Dr. Fives Rises Again. All new from American International Pictures. Rated PG, parental guidance suggested. Dr. Fives Rises Again.
They have never lived before as they live now. One man has already died, the other was never born. Both exist in a world between life and death. Both long to be human. Neither can ever be. Dracula versus Frankenstein. 10 dead men's bodies were used to fashion Dr. Frankenstein's infamous creature. Tens of dozens of victims have kept Count Dracula alive for 3 centuries. Only one of these beings will survive their meeting. Dracula versus Frankenstein. Brand new thrills, brand new horror, brand new shock. Dracula versus Frankenstein, in color, rated GP.
Thank you guys for coming to celebrate the monsters of the 70s. There were quite a few of them, and some of my favorites came from that decade, including myself. So, give you an idea of just how aged and decrepit I am. My name is Jessica Dwyer. I'm with Joe Blow Horror and Horror Hound Magazine, and I am very, very excited to welcome a legend like Joe Lansdale to the stage. Please give it up for the man that gave you God the Hotep, Happen Leonard, the Giant. We also have Derek Koch from Monster Kids Radio, which is a local podcast that you should definitely be checking out.
It's pronounced Cook, but I'll let it slide this time.
Sorry.
I'll let it slide.
I knew I was going to butcher her name.
That's all right. Get it out early.
Get it out early. And David Heath, who also does People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, another podcast that you should check out. So we're here to discuss the 70s monster films like Blacula, as well as the television shows like the Nightstalker. If you can't tell, I'm a fan.
Oh, me too.
Yes. Dan Curtis introduced us to Carl Kolchak way back in, I believe it was 1973 or 4. We just had the 50th anniversary of the Night Strangler. And within the 70s, there were just a ton of classic monsters that return. And it always made me think about the fact that every 20 years, it seems we have a resurgence, because you had the Universal Studios classics in the 30s and the 50s, you had Hammer. And then in the 70s, you had Blacksploitation, you had these classic monsters, and then you had things like Count Yorga, which not a lot of people talk about, and they should. So I wanted to bring it up that these monsters lived in modern times, but were these original legends and were able to thrive there. And this was the first taste of like urban gothic that we got. And I wanted to give these gentlemen here a chance to talk about some of their favorites from that decade and that time, and then kind of talk about more about what these movies and characters spoke to. Mr. Lansdale, let's go.
Well, I am going to add just one thing. Also, the 60s had quite a few from Roger Corman and other people like that. You had Billy the Kid versus Dracula, and you had the Frankenstein movies and things like that they did with usually with Jesse James or something like that. So I just want to throw that in. But for me, the Nightstalker is one of my absolute favorites. The whole idea of the supernatural detective goes way back to the pulps and beyond, But I loved that whole blend of kind of detective, and because he was a journalist, a reporter, but still kind of a detective, and the kind of monsters that you've seen before, but in a slightly different flavor. Because I love the Nightstalker especially. And when I was watching that on TV, it actually surprised me because I thought they put this on TV. Now it would seem, not so astounding that they would do so. But I love that one, and I love the whole idea of the Night Strangler, which is really The Strangler is a kind of a monster that's been around a long time, just as the Strangler, not necessarily as a monster in the classic sense, but this was a monster because it had to do with how often the monster returned, which is a Robert Bloch thing from yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
He also, Dan Curtis in that, that really harkened back to me, like the Quentin Collins old, the dead family in the room as well that he kept around. And it was sort of like a mix of Dorian Gray and Jekyll and Hyde a little bit.
Yes.
So, yeah, the Nightstalker, how many people here love the X-Files? Okay, you need to thank Dan Curtis and the guys that made the Nightstalker, because if you wouldn't have gotten the X-Files without this, to the point that Darren McGavin was brought into the X-Files as basically the beginner of it. So it definitely has a long history and has touched a lot of people. There.
I love them all. And seriously, I really do. Even some of the movies that you mentioned a second ago from the 60s, like Billy Kid vs. Dracula. Yeah. Yes, they're cheesy. Yes, whatever. I still find things about them to love. Mm-hmm. But of the 70s crop of monster movies, some of the things that I am particularly drawn to, and Jessica kind of rolled her eyes when I mentioned it to her before. I love the movie Blackenstein.
I do too.
I love Blackenstein. I actually just watched it this morning, and I was really kind of surprised. I didn't remember the connections that it makes to like the Vietnam War and soldiers coming home who had been disfigured and maybe not treated as well as they should have been. And I thought that was really interesting for this weird little low-budget monster movie that really probably didn't have any right to talk about these big things, but still did. But I love Blackenstein. I love that Hammer Films was trying to desperately hang on to being relevant with Dracula 1972 AD and the satanic rites of Dracula. And something that I don't think I even mentioned to Jessica yet, down in Mexico, the luchadors were fighting monsters left and right like every other week.
Yeah.
So you got Santo, the Blue Demon, fighting Frankenstein, Dracula, the daughter of Frankenstein, people in wax museums, and all these other crazy things. And I love me a good luchador movie and mix them with monsters, and I'm all in.
Yeah.
Well, and also, he mentioned Blackenstein. The other thing that I always loved about that time frame was how they used the genre to talk about relevant topics. Like, one of my favorites is Sugar Hill. Not a lot of people talk about that movie. You've got a woman as basically the anti-hero in that, who, to avenge the death of her lover, goes to Baron Zombie from the actual, religion of voodoo and uses dead slaves who are some of the creepiest designed zombies I've ever seen, who actually use their chains to kill people. And the main antagonist in it is a white Southern mafioso, basically, who gets his comeuppance. And it's a really neat take on something like that you don't really see, especially with a strong female represented in that role. So it's really cool. And the same with Blacula. People laugh at the name, people laugh at this thought, but at the same time, there's a very serious note in that film and the story. So David, what about you?
So I first saw Kolchak, I was about 4 when it first came on TV. And anyone who listens to the show knows that I have very emotional reactions to the things that I've seen and I love. And my parents, who nearly got divorced because my dad accidentally let me see the first part of the first episode of Barney Miller, left the room and let me walk in to see the UFO episode of the Kolchak. The next thing they knew, I was running out the house. Now, we moved soon afterwards. We actually moved onto a boat. And this is relevant, but the restroom was 300 feet away. And so I would have to walk 300 feet down this dock. And I would run because that Kolchak UFO alien was behind me. Then I get a little bit older. I have my own kids. And I turn on sci-fi. And I see it again. And my first thought is, well, this wasn't as scary as I was when I was 5. I also ran out of the room watching the original Star Trek once in a while, too. So, but all of a sudden, this creature that had been chasing me literally for 40 years was now in the room with me. I don't want to say as a friend, but I was no longer scared. And if it had that emotional impact for 40 years, it's something.
Yeah.
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 Well, you know, zombies have always been around, but, you know, they're, besides in the 40s, you had I Walk with a Zombie, stuff like that. But you remember on TV when I was a kid, it's not as long ago as you guys are thinking. When I was a kid, they had a show called Thriller. And Thriller was a mixture of crime shows and horror things, but they had the great Robert E. Howard story, which I later adapted to comics, called Pigeons from Hell.
We did an episode together on that.
Oh, good. My wife always goes, Pigeons from Hell, that's not scary. Pigeons aren't scary.
Oh, no.
But this was an old voodoo story, but it was also a zombie story.
Yeah.
And it was done, and at the time I saw it, it was probably the most powerful thing they'd ever had on TV. Now, times have changed. But at that time, that thing, man, when I saw that I went, wow, that's some spooky stuff right there. And I've never forgotten that. Of course, I read the story later and did some Robert E. Howard adaptations and worked in Conan and all these things. But when I saw that, it really turned me around, really flipped me out. They had stuff like the Hungry Glass and things like that. But as far as monsters go, I remember that being a zombie episode. And I think that and the old 40s zombies who were mainly like this and they choked you to death were my introduction to a zombie story. But when I saw that, I thought, oh man, these can be a lot more.
Derek let us, we normally can only talk about movies. He gave special permission so we could talk about a TV show on that episode.
Oh, okay. And we're just doing movies here?
But on my podcast, we did that.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. On the podcast we were on. And I will say that your comic book came up several times. Very complimentary.
Oh, thank you.
The thing about zombies, if I can jump on that real quick. Before I did the Monster Kid Radio podcast, I did a podcast called Mail Order Zombie, where I was reviewing zombie movies every week for over 300 zombie movies and TV shows and all that. And yeah, it was a challenge. But you were talking about every 20 years the monsters come back and they are used to reflect what's going on in society. Zombies do the exact same thing. You look at the zombie movies from the 30s and 40s, and you look at a still from White Zombie or I Walk with a Zombie, and compare it to news photography of people on a breadline during the Depression.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really hard to tell them apart.
Absolutely.
You see something like that, and then you get to like the 60s with what Romero's doing, and then the stuff that Japan does with zombies when it comes to like overpopulation issues and things like that. It's really interesting that, especially with zombies, and I'm sure we can see it with vampires and werewolves and Frankensteins and things like that as well.
There's
they're used so much.
There's a UK series that I think only lasted 2 seasons called In the Flesh that if you haven't heard of it, you need to check it out, that takes the zombie myth and really transforms it to where it basically speaks to being gay in society and acceptance, and the revenants that come back have to wear makeup and contact lenses and take a medicine to keep from eating people. And then of course there's the zombies that are like, well, we need to be us. Now, if we eat people, we eat people. Well, it's just who we are. And then you have, the other characters are like trying to find their way. And I love the use of the genre like that to speak to things like that. It's so fantastic. And the Nightstalker really did that. With episodes, we were just talking about the spirit of the Indian that comes back to avenge the taking of his land on the people that the rich New York socialites, basically. And at that time, in the 70s, there was a ton of Native American protesting going on for that very thing. And then you had, this was like 4 or 5 years before Damien 3, like Omen 3, where you had the Devil's Platform episode with Tom Skerritt. Where he plays a candidate that is actually Satan's candidate. And if you have any thoughts and feelings and emotions, Portland, about politics right now.
Well, that's echoed in the Dead Zone. The guy's not the devil per se, but he certainly personifies that when he shakes hands with him and has those.
Yeah, we can't see any of those guys holding up a child as a human shield right now, can we?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I won't go there. But also in that same realm, back in the late 60s, early 70s, you had Dark Shadows, which I have to give love to, because that series is the reason you have your romantic lead vampire. People seem to think that all came from Buffy and that all came from, Twilight. But no, it came from Dark Shadows with Barnabas, and that's where you had your reincarnated love interest for the first time. And he also did that with Jack Palance's Dracula, which is one of the best.
Yeah, Richard Matheson.
Yep.
Richard Matheson did that script. I'm one of the, who also Night Strangler and the Nightstalker. He did a couple of those. Plus, Richard Matheson wrote so many of the old Poe films, some with Charles Beaumont. But that was a guy that really covered some ground.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I Am Legend comes from Richard.
Yeah, which has been turned into I don't know how many different variations of that.
Three films.
Three direct.
Yes.
Yeah.
But variations multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dark Shadows, it crossed over into color and it crossed over into film in the early 70s. And one of the best things about it, and again, if you have not watched Dark Shadows, if you love Gothic literature, literally Dan Curtis took every Gothic novel you can think of and made a soap opera storyline with it.
And I have another personal story. Is I lived in the greater LA area, so they reran those for a long while. And I walked in and I asked my mom, what was she watching? And she said, it's a soap opera. I go, no, it has ghosts. It can't be a soap opera. And she explained to me it was a soap opera. And then that was one of the first times I realized my mom and I had the same interest. If we could just find somebody that could focus it in, we might. Of course, I was 5 years old, so I didn't quite understand it. But I was shocked that my mom would watch something like 5-year-old would watch Scooby-Doo.
Well, the Gothic aspect too, think about it. When you go back to I Walk with a Zombie, that's Jane Eyre with zombies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's exactly what it is. And then Dark Shadows took some of that feeling.
Yep.
Maybe not the direct thing, but it took some of that feeling. Now, I never saw but 3 episodes of it. I was always after school, and I never saw it. But 2 or 3 times I was at a friend's house, and it was on, and I watched it, and I thought, ooh, this is cool. We had a werewolf, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did werewolves. There's a Frankenstein.
There's a Dorian Gray.
It's all over the place.
They have H.P. Lovecraft in there, too, with Leviathans.
Yeah. Oh, well, I didn't know that.
He went through every one of them.
Yeah, like I said, I only saw 3 episodes, but I knew what it was, and I liked the idea of it. It just, things weren't like they are now. We go, I'll just go dial that up. Or, if you didn't see it when it came on, you had to wait for reruns, and then they probably came at the same time of when I couldn't see them.
Yeah, Dark Shadows, definitely, if you want to get your in on, basically it's a master's class on Gothic Lit. And you can thank that Dan Curtis and those guys for a lot.
It's available on some various streaming services now, and each episode was originally a half-hour soap opera, so take out commercials, you got about maybe 25, 23 minutes. Yeah. And even the pre-Barnabas stuff, before he shows up, there's a Phoenix storyline that I really, really like. There's a parapsychologist character at one point that's doing stuff. Just really, really cool stuff going on with that.
And Johnny Depp did a film version of it, too, for comedy. But
there's the Tim Burton film as well.
Yeah, and then there's 2 feature films, House of Dark Shadows and Night of Dark Shadows. House of Dark Shadows is basically a constrained version of the vampire storyline, and they go bloody. So it feels like Dark Shadows went hammer.
Yeah.
And that one, it's great. I wanted to give you all guys a chance if you had questions to answer, to give us questions. But I did want to bring up one thing, which is I have this shirt on with Robert Corey, who is one of my favorites. Not enough people talk about Robert Corey. I'm going to give a little bit of a love to Robert Corey right now. He played Count Yorga. Mm-hmm. And the thing with the Count Yorga films and the Death Master, those movies are some of the creepiest, most blood-chilling vampire films you're going to see. His teeth look like a shark's. He's barely restrained a rage in these movies, and they harken back to the Sharon Tate murders. Especially the second one has one of the most chilling attack scenes I have ever seen on film, and it goes very long. But it's also classic vampire. And Robert Quarry gets lost in the shuffle with Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee, and those guys who he co-starred with. And Dr. Phibes Rises Again, and Madhouse, which is another fantastic movie. But he should get some love because he did create one of the most chilling vampires around with Yorga. And you can watch those films on streaming as well. I think they've been uploaded to YouTube too.
I got a Robert Quarry story. It's where I almost met Robert Quarry. One time, my friend Lee Langford was friends with Robert Quarry, and he was in a rest home for actors. And I went over with my friend one day. He said, "I've got to stop by and see a friend." And I said, "Okay." So I'm standing outside the room while he goes in to check on, and I hear this voice. And I go, "My God, it's Count Yorga." And he was in there a little while, and I'm listening to this voice. I came out and said, "Was that Robert Quarry?" He said, "Yeah, he's a friend of mine. I come to check on stuff." So I almost met him. Well, he was right there at that door if I'd have been brave enough to go. But he's a vampire, so I didn't go in.
They could have kept me out. We'd like, no.
But I just remembered that. That was kind of funny. You know, on the X-Files, too, you mentioned the X-Files being a follower of some of these other things, and you know, they had moments when they would return to at least episodes that were reminiscent of classic monsters. And I remember one that reminded me of the creature from the Black Lagoon. I don't remember all the details.
The worm one?
Yeah.
There was that creepy worm-looking thing?
Yeah. But they also, I guess it was. Yeah. It's when they were like in the sewage.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I thought, wow, that's the creature from the Black Lagoon reworked. Yeah. And I would be remiss if I not say that my daughter's husband was in an episode of the X-Files.
That's right.
Yeah. Jonathan Levitt is a professional magician, and he and Ricky Jay had an episode where they were the lead in that episode. And what was it? You remember the name of it? Amazing Melina. It's very good. Yeah, it's first acting deal, and it's one of the best episodes. And it's strange and different, but I had to do that. I had to. You know, my son-in-law might want me not to do that, but on the other hand, I think he would because he knows he's very good in that. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to give the audience a chance to ask questions if you had any. If not, we can keep talking. Oh, we got one back there.
Wondering if you could speak about your inspiration for Bubba Hotep. It's just such a warm movie in a lot of ways. I have relatives who worked in nursing home. I just really enjoyed it. They don't really watch this background at Whitney, so I decided you.
You know, I can't understand you. You're too far away.
What was your inspiration for Bubba Hotep?
Oh, Bubba Hotep. Well, you know, oddly enough, my brother's 17 years older than me, and he went to Memphis where he was trying to record his Sun Records. And he did record something that just did not happen for him. But he met his wife there who went to high school with Elvis. And so she graduated with Elvis. And so one time when my brother was with her, they went into Lowe's Theater, and a guy took her to their seats. He had a flashlight, and it was Elvis Presley. He worked at Lowe's Theater as an escort to the. They used to do that in theaters. An usher? And show an usher, and they would show you to your seat. And that's how he first met him. And he said the next time he saw him, his hair was black, and he was on a motorcycle, and next to him was Natalie Wood on another motorcycle. But he was always friendly to him and always nice. And so I had that in the background. And I always loved mummy movies. You know, I love the original Boris Karloff, The Mummy, a lot. It's slow to people nowadays, but I think it's very, very powerful and very creepy. So there was that. I added that in, too. JFK was assassinated when I was about 11 years old, and that, of course, impacted me quite a bit, impacted the entire nation. So that was all in my mind, and my mother had an accident where she had to be in a home 24/7 to take care of her. She'd had a brain accident from she was thrown through the windshield, you know.
Oh, wow.
So I would be there a lot with my brother. We would go there to check on her and stay with her and stuff like that. And so I listened to people talk and listened to people when they were walking around and all. And, you know, a lot of people ignore people as they get older, which is not good because I'm getting older, you know. And I would listen, and all of that just sort of came together. I got a request to write a story for an anthology called Dead Elvis at that time. It later is called The King is Dead. And I wrote Bubba Hotep just passionately. And as soon as I finished it and sent it off, we used mail then, y'all, sent it off in the mail. And I went, boy, have I screwed up. That is a crazy, crazy story. And so I thought about it, and I said, it's pretty crazy. And I did some kind of experimental writing in it too. And I thought, I'm going to withdraw that story. So I wrote a letter to withdraw it, but before I sent it out, I got an acceptance back, almost like it turned around in 3 days or something, 3 days back. Oh. And they said, this is our favorite story in the book. And I said, yeah, it is good, isn't it?
Well, and I have to add in that I saw the film not very long after I lost my grandfather, and I had no idea how that was going to nail me.
That's what it's about.
Yeah, and I won tickets to go see it, and I got like this little prize pack, and I got my husband and dragged him to the theater, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to see Buff. It's freaking great. It's going to be Elvis, Bruce Campbell. I end up bawling, like, for the last 20 minutes of that movie, just sobbing my freaking eyes out. I'm like, damn you, Lansdale.
Yeah. I told Bruce this. I said, every time I see that, I cry a little. Till I remember it's you. But I do. It always affects me. He really, I think it's his best role. Yeah. And I thought he did a tremendous job, playing that character. And of all I have an adaptation out right now called The Thicket with Peter Dinklage and Juliette Lewis. Yeah. And it came out Friday. Good film. But my favorite adaptation is that one. And in fact, at The Thicket, sitting behind us was Don Coscarelli, the director, who we got to visit with and spend time with, him and his son Andy. But Don one day just gave me a call, and he said, my name is Don Coscarelli, and I'm a director. I said, I know who you are. I said, do you know who you're talking to? I've seen all this stuff. And he said, can I come visit at your house for a few days? I want to talk to you about some things. I said, yeah, Don, come on. So he brought gifts for the kids, and they were little then. And he came and stayed, and we had the best time. And we had trash theater where we watched the kind of monster movies and terrible movies too. We baked this. My wife would make these giant bags of greasy popcorn that would send you into another dimension. And every night I'd go to bed and I'd wake up. I got a story, and I would write that story and sell it. And it got to where I knew that the bank account was getting low because I'd hear shaking that popcorn. But anyway, he stayed with us, and he talked to me about he wanted to do the drive-in at that moment, and maybe Dead in the West, which he and I and Bruce almost did. But then one of them was option, whatever, but he went home, and then a little bit later he said, hey, I went into a bookstore, and they gave me this book, Writer of the Purple Rage, and I read the story, Bubba Hotep. I want to option that story. I went, oh, Don, I love you, but no. Because you'll never make it. It'll turn out awful. You can't do a script. Don't do it. He said, no, Joe, I really want to do it. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, I'll give you an option. Okay. And so I got some option money. And anyway, he did it. And then when he came back and the option ran out, I didn't argue him that time. I was ready to take his money again, because I already told you can't do it. And then he said, you want to do the script? And I said, how much? He told me. I said, no. He's like Roger Corman, and also I'm in the Writers Guild. But on top of that, he sent me a script, and I read it, and I went, golly, he did it. And I had some notes, and I sent them to him, and he ignored them. And then Bruce Campbell had the same notes, and then they were wonderful. And it's one of my favorite films, and I feel special about it because I was close to the people. I got to meet Bruce on the set. I met Ossie Davis, and Bruce and I have continued to be friends. Don and I have continued to be friends. So it also has a family aspect to it too.
Oh, right here in front.
Yeah, so we've seen DC Comics now coming back to life, and Hammer Horrors now coming back to life, and if the new Wolfman movie coming out,
the one L,
and so I'm just kind of wondering what full property or piece are you most excited about? It's coming.
Wolfman for me. That's always been my favorite monster.
I'm really excited about Nosferatu. Also,
that too.
The Doug Jones one that's coming soon.
I'm already scared.
And then the one coming on, because it's Robert Eggers, and that man makes very pretty horror films.
I'm looking forward to Nosferatu as well, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the news about Creature from the Black Lagoon getting
Oh, really? I didn't hear that.
It's not solid. I don't think it's been confirmed, but there's been a lot of talk about James Wan being attached to it. And Creature from the Black Lagoon, if you listen to Monster Kid Radio, know that that's my favorite movie. I can't go more than like half a day without talking about it. I love that film. I love that film so much. But so I'm like I said, cautiously optimistic about what they're going to do to My Gilman.
So wherever they do something like that, there's an echo in Portland. All the writers that are the local, they start getting inspired. And we see this a lot right around the Lovecraft Film Festival when all of a sudden there's this good book. So I'm honestly more excited about what people I know kind of on a first name basis are going to do with this than what's in the theater.
I'll tell you the one that I would love for them to make, because we've got all this stuff coming with Creature Commandos coming back and having a TV show. I want DC to make I, Vampire. That is my goal in life, and I'm not talking the new one that they did. I'm talking about Andrew Bennett with the hair looking like Ben Cross. I want that to be made, and I want David Dastmalchian to play him.
Ooh.
Yeah, right?
He'd be down, I'm sure.
He would.
Yeah.
He wants to play a vampire.
I got to tell you, my favorite, I love the novel Dracula, but my favorite vampire movie to this very day is The Silent Virgin with Nosferatu.
So
it
good.
scares the hell out of me, and I know what's going to happen, but when he rises up, that I always go, "Ooh." And my daughter saw that, and it like scarred her for life when she was little. Or ever.
About the dog, I was like convinced he was behind a shower curtain.
We need a support group.
I saw The Exorcist when I was 5 years old, and my mom thought that was funny.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, the Psycho's kind of a werewolf movie, really. I mean, I knew Robert Bloch a little, and I admired him a lot, and I even wrote the introduction to a recent one to a limited version of Psycho and to some of his short story collections. But he saw it as a comedy, and so did Alfred Hitchcock. And when I thought about it, so did I. You know, it really was a comedy, but it is in its own way. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, which is like a werewolf in a way. You know, you change whether you use the chemicals or the moon or whatever. But I think a lot of people forget that a lot of things that where you have people that have sort of dual identities, and one of them is not so nice, are really nothing more than what was reflected in Werewolf and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Because back in the past, way past, when you had serial killers or you had spree killers, they tried to explain it somehow. You know, in France, they had these terrible werewolf murders. I forget what exact year and what the guy's name.
1700s.
Yes, 1700s. And they were this town, this village, and people were being slaughtered terribly by something, and they decided it was a werewolf, being cut all up. And they actually found a guy wearing a wolf costume, which was probably a bad idea, and they killed him. And they thought that they had got that person, but then later on, these things continued. And they continued to the point that there's a real strong theory, which I neither back nor deny, that it was a tamed hyena that this guy used to attack people in that village. And there's even evidence of it, and even the hyena exists in a museum there. So they think, what's a hyena doing here in France?
There's a movie,
vacation.
There's a movie based on that called Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Yeah.
That's
I haven't seen it.
Really good. Yeah. It's a great movie. It's kind of circular. You bring up Psycho because Simon Oakland, who played Vincenzo in The Nightstalker, is in that.
That's right. Yep.
I have all kinds of useless knowledge in here. Any other questions before I think went over.
Did we?
Wait, maybe. Good. We got 14 more minutes. Yeah. So I wanted to give a chance to these fine gentlemen to give you guys a primer, basically. I want you to pick your choice of a movie from the 70s that they should go see or find.
Brides of Dracula.
That's a great one. That's like my favorite Peter Fishy.
It's the only one that ever gave me a nightmare for some weird reason.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
No, it's my favorite of the Dracula sequels from Hammer. So,
Right.
And it's my favorite Van Helsing from Hammer.
Yeah.
What jacks me around is when those locks drip off the coffin. You know, they have for some reason that I went, and there's a bad one, but it scared the hell out of me is The Return of Dracula, which was done. It's in black and white.
Yeah, I love that.
And
I love that.
but it's really kind of lousy in some ways. But in other ways, what scared me so much, it was kind of like my own hometown.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
The thing with Brides of Dracula that's funny is the fact that the woman who played his mother in that was younger than him.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. The lead actor, David Peel, in that was just gorgeous for his age. And the woman who played his mother was like 3 years younger than he was. And yeah, so, all right, next.
I'm looking something up, so.
Next.
So, I'm driving under the tunnel. I didn't hear all of what you said. I didn't hear the word movie, and I'm going to say TV show.
Okay, go for
and
it.
You get it. The demon episode of Doctor Who.
Oh,
There's an entire period of Doctor Who that is called the Gothic period, where the Master is hiding as an Anglican priest. How can you get more Gothic than that?
Roger Delgado's. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, my daughter's holding up something to remind me to tell you I have an anthology out right now, and it's here, and it's a Lovecraftian anthology with a variety of inspired Lovecraft short stories by yours truly. And so she's letting me know that I should say.
I was gonna pimp.
And if you had held me to movies, I would have said Dunwich Horror, which I hated the first time I saw.
I like that movie.
But as I watch it over, and I don't watch the LA edited version that they showed.
There's an edited version?
The TV version, ABC, NBC.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean, all the TV stations would.
Oh yeah, that was when Gidget going topless in that movie.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big draw back then.
Yeah.
As far as the 1970s stuff go, I'm also going to do a TV show.
Go for it.
I'm going to recommend the TV series Night Gallery.
Oh, yeah.
Night Gallery is fantastic. Now, you've mentioned The Return of Dracula, Francis Lederer. He also plays... I'm going to spoil it because whatever, but there is a short story by Manly Wade Wellman called The Devil Is Not Mocked.
Oh, I love that story.
It's a great story, and Lederer appears in an adaptation of that as well in Night Gallery.
Was that him?
Yeah.
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is so good. But Night Gallery, I'm done with spoilers. Night Gallery is Rod Serling's follow-up project to The Twilight Zone, and it's just got some really, really good stuff in it.
I met the guy that did all the paintings, and I got a book from my daughter and son-in-law with all of his paintings in them, and I keep them behind my desk just to open them for inspiration.
Oh, nice. That would do it. There's some gorgeous stuff in there.
Because it may have a break-in at some point. I'm going to go again with the Count Yorga films.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one.
Just because, again, those films have, like I said, the sound editing in them and the design and the acting in them is just really terrifying. And I'll kind of be a spoiler here. There's no happy ending. There's no happy ending in those movies.
Well, back then they did a lot of stuff without everybody didn't have to be satisfied in the end. It's one of the scary things. If you ever knew who was going to survive, you never did know that. But that Count Yorga film, when I saw it, fit exactly the tonality of those times because I'd gone through. I'd grown up in the 50s and 60s, and you had the Manson murders. You had all of this witchcraft stuff that was very popular then, black magic, and a lot of cults. Yeah. So when that one came out, man, it hit the sweet spot,
Yeah, the Death Master too is kind of like an unofficial Yorga entry as well, where he really is very Manson-y in that. Yeah. And I just love those films. It's hard for a vampire to scare me. Typically, I'm like, hey, but Yorga, he is terrifying. There's no romance really. He's just pure appetite, and it's hot its own way, but
see what she did there.
But yeah, he's not nice. He's not going to cuddle you. He's not going to glow in the sunlight. He's going to rip your throat out and turn you into his hag, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, so everybody, we're a little early. If you have any more questions, oh, there we go.
You've seen Hereditary, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you seen the other projects made by the guy that did it?
Oh, you're talking about Midsummer?
Yeah, and there was like there was 3 more that are more like an unknown thing. I was just wondering, do you think that it's like more horrifying than Hereditary, like more like a psych?
I go with Midsummer to me is the folk horror stuff, and that tends to be scarier than most things because it's typically going to be the entire community involved with it. And if you're the outsider going into that, like the Wicker Man, for instance, if you haven't seen the original
Harvest Home,
the original Wicker Man is one of the most horrifying films because the hero, quote unquote, is screwed. There's the entire village is
or not screwed when you think about the plot.
Yeah, there's see what you did there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
But Christopher Lee, Edward Woodward, the classic folk horror story.
Yeah.
And there's a whole, by the way, there's a fantastic documentary on Shudder called
it took me a while, but I finally watched
something like Wild, Wicked, and Dark. And it's all about folk horror. It's almost 3 hours long. And it goes through the entire history of folk horror in cinema. And it is excellent. And that kind of stuff gets you because it's, again, a whole community. And it's been around typically longer than Christianity, what they've been worshiping. And it's old and it's been waiting.
Well, I think one of the scariest stories ever because of this is The Lottery.
There you go.
Shirley Jackson. She wrote a lot of scary ones.
Yeah.
The Haunting of Hill House is my favorite. One of my favorite books, and certainly it's my favorite horror film, actually.
Really?
The early one, the 60s one.
Yeah.
There's no horror film that does it for me like that one.
Yeah.
It really does. I didn't like the remake, the TV. I liked the first 3-4 episodes, and then it fell apart for me. But the original Shirley Jackson adaptation of it's just called The Haunting.
Yeah.
Is fantastic. They remade it later on. It's just god awful.
I saw that in the theater. And
hurt my feelings.
Yeah, same.
I saw that movie on a date with my wife that I have since divorced. So.
Yeah, there you go.
Really hurt his feelings. All right, back there.
What do you think about the holiday genre horror movie? From it.
Oh, I loved Krampus. I thought that was great, but probably one of my favorites is Mike Dougherty's Trick or Treat, and I am waiting for them to make the sequel. I'm ready. I love anthology films, and that one is just so good. But I love the fact that Terrifier 3 is going to be a Christmas movie, which is so wrong on so many levels. What about you guys?
Yeah, well, strangely enough, there was a short story of mine called Christmas with the Dead that was filmed in a real low-budget film, but it's a lot of fun. The problem is we don't have we never got a streaming service for it, and you have to see it on a DVD, and you can buy it off Amazon and stuff. But it is a zombie Christmas film with a real heart. Some hearts will be, but no, it really does. It has real heart, and my daughter had a role in it, and she's hiding.
She's gonna wish she never did.
Yeah. My son actually wrote the adaptation, and he wrote another horror film. He wrote Witches. Talking about witches. He wrote one called The Pale Door with a couple of other people.
I know that movie.
Yeah,
I know the guys that made that. That's a fantastic.
Yeah, well, Keith was one of the co-writers on that film. We're all kin. I promise, we're all kin.
Yeah.
The horror community is very inbreeding.
Yeah.
There's a reason there's things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
They're meaner than the pure fantasy community.
Yeah, we are.
No, they're sweethearts.
Anybody else out there got a question? Going once, going twice. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming. This was fun. Check out Monster Kid Radio.
I've got a few cards from my Monster Kid Radio podcast up here. Please feel free to take one and check out what I do every week.
Check out Joe Blow Horror and Horror Hound Magazine. And also don't forget to check out Mr. Lansdale's new Cthulhu-esque novel that you can get over.
And go see The Thicket. I need the money.
Get the money.
I will. I'll see you.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's it. Thank you for sticking around. Thanks for checking out the episode, and huge thanks if you've done one of those resharing and tweeting and Xing and promoting and just sharing your love for all things Monster Kid with people online, please direct your friends to Monster Kid Radio to check out this episode or any of the previous 675 of them. That's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. And I love doing it. It seems like every week, every episode, I find something new to love when it comes to the world of monster movies, especially classic monster movies. This week, this episode, having an opportunity to be on a panel with my friend David. I've never been on a panel with Jessica before, so that was fun. And to be able to sit right next to Joe Lansdale and have him kind of mutter to me things like, "Oh, I really like that movie," when I bring up Blackenstein. I mean, how cool is that? So big thanks to Jessica, Joe, and David for being part of the show. And thanks to Rose City Comic Con for hosting an incredible panel. And I didn't have to do any work. I didn't have to moderate. I could just show up. It was a good time. I also was on a panel with David Heath, D.B. Switzer, and Gretchen Martin from The People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. It had to do with the Lovecraftian gods. I did try to record that, but I haven't listened to that audio yet because my life has been topsy-turvy, all kinds of crazy right now. And that brings us to the special announcement. Monster Kid Radio, we got to go on hiatus because in a couple of days, I am loading the rest of my life up into a truck and we are driving down to Arizona. We are finally making the move and joining my wife, joining Beth down there. And it's going to take a little while to kind of get things settled and put back into place. Monster Kid Radio will come back. In fact, we've already talked about some of the things we're going to do with Monster Kid Radio, because not only are we coming back, we're going to come back a little bit different and I think a little better. Now, what does this mean for you? Absolutely nothing other than you don't have any new MKR to listen to. Go to the archives and check out old stuff if you want, but you don't have to change anything. You don't have to change how you listen to the show. You don't have to change how you subscribe to the show. None of that is going to change, okay? When we come back, it might look a little different. There are going to be some things that look the same, like the Beta Capsule review and any other segments. I think Kenny's going to be along for the ride as well. Just trust me, please. In the meantime, check out monsterkidradio.net. That's not going to change either. That website's going to stay the same. So go to monsterkidradio.net to keep up with everything we got going on with the podcast. You can also find us online, Facebook, Twitter, or X, and all that, Reddit, Discord, Patreon, all of those things. In fact, I will go into a little bit more detail with our patrons over at patreon.com to let everybody know what's going on there as well, because, if you're supporting the show by being a patron, I want to, give you a little bit more information. I owe you that at the very least. So, bottom line is, stay tuned. There won't be a new episode of Monster Kid Radio for a few weeks. We are going to be back in October, and that's just going to happen. It's the most wonderful time of the year. You think we're going to miss out on that? Absolutely not. So it's not going to be a long break, but it will be a short break while we're getting everything moved and packed, and I guess it's the other way around. Packed, moved, and unpacked, and then settled in. I have been putting my body through all kinds of torture trying to get everything done. Oh man, I am worn out. So I don't know if you can tell in my voice or not, but I'm bushed. I'm pooped. So, Beth, tell them what you need to tell them.
Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 unported license. You can learn more about Team Death or other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, Monster Kid Writer, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. That's teamdeath.com. Please rate and review Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
Once again, thanks everybody for an incredible 676-plus episode ride of Monster Kid Radio. We will be back in a few weeks once we finish the move, and it's going to be bigger and better and more monsterific. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next time. Ciao.